One of the things that's very interesting about the topic we're going to be discussing tonight, the Heather Heritage Pavilion, is that it's kind of back on the radar. And so we thought it was a really good opportunity to speak again about this building in our hidden gem, as we call it, that has not yet been, it's been saved, it's kind of there, but it's not kind of made it to the next stage in its life yet, and it's been an ongoing story for many years, as I'll discuss. I know there's a lot of people here tonight that have a personal connection to the building, either worked in it or worked in it. How many of you have, yeah, quite a few people know the building in various stages of probably decrepitude and probably have some great stories we can talk about later. But the story of the Heather Pavilion is really quite fascinating, and hopefully we'll be able to round it up to 2019 and see where we are right now. So this is the Heritage Pavilion as it was built. And you'll see by the trees and the rubble and everything in the background that, boy, there wasn't much around it when it was built, and how things have changed since 1906. I mean, pretty astonishing when you think about it. We keep saying, well, this is going to happen soon, will happen soon, and hopefully at some point, as we'll see by the end of the talk tonight, this is where we hope to end up, is back where we started. Very brief history of the context, why Heather Pavilion is where it is, why it was built as it was. As you can see in this slide, right there, that was Vancouver's first hospital. It was built by the CPR as they were laying tracks. These are not rail tracks, these are actually streetcar tracks, but it was located out sort of East Pender at Heatley, and it was just kind of a shack kind of structure, and the city bought it from the CPR after the Great Fire. So that was the first city hospital, and everybody completely understood this was not going to last, the growing city, and this was just in anticipation, of course, of the railway arriving in 1887. The original city hospital, which was established very shortly after, grew quite quickly. It was at Pender and Beatty, where the parkade is right now, right across from Victory Square. It was a very central site in the very early city in 1887, but as the buildings grew very quickly, the city was also growing even more quickly, and these buildings were outgrown in a very few short years. And you can see the building here, right here, over here. The building with the dome is actually the original courthouse, where Victory Square is. Central School's behind it. The flak block is on the other side. And because the hospital was adjacent to the courthouse, there was no room to expand. So it was really understood very, very quickly that the hospital was going to have to move, and the city was growing so explosively that steps were taken pretty quickly to establish a new site. So very soon after this picture would have been taken, a new site had been acquired in Fairview, what is called Fairview neighborhood, and it was the area sort of 2 streets up from the streetcar, which was Broadway. And it was on this ridge, Fairview Ridge, and on what was between 10th and 11th and 12th, there were actually a number of large parcels of land that were acquired and set aside for a number of institutional buildings in early Vancouver. And this was kind of, as the city expanded and grew outward from Burrard Inlet, this became central. It was certainly, there wasn't much there at the time. This is a construction shot from about 1905. And you can see there isn't much else around, but as you know, ultimately, at the same time, the Model and Normal School were being conceived. The King Ed High School was being built. There was a big orphanage down here. So there were a number of things that were starting to be established, and ultimately Vancouver City Hall kind of fell into that line of institutional buildings as well, up on that ridge. You can see that the neighborhood is growing. The streetcar system provided good access, and ultimately the city grew up around this new location. It was, some people thought it was a bit remote at the time, but it was a pretty prescient move. So 5.5 acres bought from the CPR for about $5,500 or something. I mean, pretty good deal. There was this was always the city hospital, as opposed to, of course, St. Paul's, which was run by the Sisters of Providence. But this was the City of Vancouver Hospital. There was a plebiscite, and the city wanted to acquire the new site. The citizens voted to acquire the new site in 1902. There was an architectural competition held. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. And ultimately, as this was established very quickly, the city exploded in terms of its growth. 1906, when the hospital, the first section of the hospital opened, was the time that the big Panama Canal boom started. Teddy Roosevelt went down to Panama and guaranteed its success personally through the American government. And that caused a wave of speculation that drove this, the biggest boom in the city's history from 1906 to 1912. And during that time period, the Fairview campus, all of a sudden, oops, just started filling up with buildings. And we saw that happen very, very quickly. By 1912, of course, the University of British Columbia had been established, but had nowhere to go. So the first buildings and first students, first classes at UBC were held at what was called the Fairview campus, which was actually where VGH is. So we had the growing campus of VGH and new buildings coming in, the growing temporary buildings of UBC, which lasted till the 1920s and the Great Trek. And we see the campus really starting to fill up. This is just about wartime, when during the First World War, when the land is being cleared for what were called the Fairview Shacks, which was UBC lecture halls. In 1916, the Heather Heritage Pavilion was actually altered, so pretty early in its history. It was built in several stages up till 1912. By 1916, the new operating room went in, operating room number 1. Love this picture. This is just, and we know who all those people are too. It's all in the book. But this was considered a very progressive, modern, important facility at VGH. By 1918, you can see the site is just pretty much starting to fill up. We have UBC, there's the Fairview Shacks in the foreground. We've got isolation cottages. We had very shortly, well, by 1918, we had of course, the Spanish flu epidemic. There was a flu barn that was built, as it was called. So we're starting to see all these buildings to take over what was previously just bare land at this campus. There's also enormous changes that occurred in the First World War. Many women, of course, not only worked in factories and supported the war effort, but went into medical care. We see new technology, I know, really, X-rays. Lots of new technology was becoming available, and again, the city was growing explosively, so VGH is trying to catch up. More buildings being built, and you can see they're starting to kind of dwarf and kind of surround the original Heather Heritage Pavilion. However, what was, talking to people and from memories of the time, what was also really important about this very gracious and grand building was its setting, which had grown up over time. The Rose Garden, which was very much loved by the patients and by people who worked there. This lovely garden that was the forecourt to the building. By the 30s, we're seeing lots more buildings being built. By the 1940s, we're starting to see a whole new architecture evolve on the VGH Fairview campus. The architects for this phase of the expansion were Townley and Matheson, who also designed City Hall, and as you probably know, this building is currently being demolished. But there was a whole phase of construction. This building was built in 1944 and during the wartime. And again, because the hospital was caring for returning soldiers and veterans, etc., that was a period of expansion as well. And here's the Fairview campus in 1945. You can see at the top right, Heather Pavilion still stands fairly stands out, isn't really compromised in any particular way yet, but there's a lot of growth going on the campus, and right in the middle between these two buildings in the center is where the Centennial Pavilion is going to go. So you can see there's not going to be much room left. Centennial goes in, ultimately Jimmy Pattison Pavilion, so the campus is full. It's had nowhere to expand. So what began to happen, and we see this starting in the 1950s, is that in and around the Heather Pavilion, the space that was originally around the building that made it so grand and imposing became building sites. And so it was also a time when, again, technology was changing, healthcare was changing, and the Heather Pavilion became less useful than it had been originally as medical support space. So you see these new wings go up around it and start to kind of, let's be kind, embrace it, to sort of surround it and begin to hide it from public view. And this is kind of the start of it in the 50s. And over time, there were enough buildings built around it that it kind of disappeared. And so it wasn't so much that it disappeared, but you lost the sense of it being a complete building, and you certainly didn't have that sense of grandness, and you did not see around it the kind of open space that would allow you to kind of understand this building. So there were some changes that were more sensitive than others. I mean, but you can see things got lopped off and changed and kind of incorporated into new sections. But really, there wasn't a lot of sense that this building had survived. If you look at it, this is actually kind of today, and this is with some of the carbuncles removed, but you get a sense that the building was too big to tear down. It was too solid. It was too much granite. So it was easier to leave it and build around it. So over time, there was actually a lot of this building that just didn't go anywhere. It was built up to or built around or close to, but it's still, you can see it's still there. You can see the hipped roofs. Looking at it from the other direction, from the east looking west, you can see how those additions just kind of collided into it. There was no kind of grace or thought to it. It was an old building, and it was just being hidden by these new modern medical facilities that were going in around it. And by the way, this is after what was built on 10th was taken away. You couldn't even see the front of the building at all. So it's there, but you just have to find it. It's in there somewhere. There's bits and pieces of it all over. Again, it just was too big and too difficult to tear down. And looking at the front of it today, there it is, you can see we still have a ways to go. That the building is still in there, but there's still more of it that's still encapsulated. It's there somewhere, okay? So the rediscovery of the Heather Pavilion is the story now of demolition, of getting rid of the later things that have been added and getting back to what was original, again, scraping it clean back to what it was when it was first built. So keep going, there's even more we can find. And so it's becoming like an archaeological dig. We know it's there. We can't really see it yet, but it's starting to emerge. And that's the stage kind of which we are at now. So by 2009, 2010, we're seeing a lot of what was in front of the building come off, and we were thrilled because this was just after the centennial. We were seeing some progress, and then everything kind of stopped. But there was a significant unearthing of part of the building at that point in 2009, 2010. And again, a comparison between what's there today and the 1912 fire insurance map shows you how the building is kind of survived, but it's really still not that visible. But from certain angles, you can see where it's been unearthed and opened up, and this is the west elevation at the front. And it's really important to remember that this has been a process, that we didn't always know that it was there. And that this was really a surprise. And even to people who are familiar with the hospital at the time and worked there and knew it, it wasn't really clear how much of the building had survived because it was so hidden and so built up against. So there's been a process, and that process has been going on for many years. So, as so many things in the 1980s, this was going to be demolished. Everything was kind of being cleared out for the VGH plan that was underway at the time, and everybody kind of felt, oh, it's too bad it has to go, but there's not much left of it anyway. And this went on from, this is a really condensed story. By 1990, the city wasn't quite so convinced that there wasn't anything there. And if you see between those two dates, something very significant happened. 1986, the city's 100th birthday, the establishment of the city's heritage program. These are things that all of a sudden kick into consciousness. And of course, this building was known about, but nobody really knew what was there. Richard Henriquez Architects were retained by the city to review the feasibility of adapting this building to a new use. And the report noted that despite it being buried, it was 90% intact and could be adapted for reuse. And if you think at the time, Richard Henriquez had completed Sinclair Center and in adaptive reuse of 4 heritage buildings, you can see that the time was ripe to start thinking about this kind of activity, and we were beginning to think about adaptive reuse. The planning continued. This VGH is a huge campus, really, 5.5 acres, massive amounts of construction going on, huge facility, very important to the city. So as you can imagine, there's constant planning going on for upgrading and for things to be done on the campus. And there's a lot of construction, building, reconstruction, et cetera, going on all the time. There was, by 1993, a conceptual plan put in place for the campus, which was leading towards a rezoning. And it called for groups interested in the reuse, but there was a very strict deadline for proposals, which was really kind of a challenge for such a large building and such a large project. In 1994, the Heather Heritage Society was formed, and we have 2 original members who are still on the board, Marguerite Ford and Betty Kirkwood, and they've lasted this long. And nobody's given up until this building's restored. So the Heather Heritage Pavilion was instrumental in asking for an extension for those proposals and worked to find uses for the building. And ultimately in 2001, when the rezoning package was negotiated, it was decided that the 1906 portions of the Heather Pavilion, the original Heather Pavilion, would be retained, and in 2002 they were legally designated. And this was the point of victory. This was the point of recognition that the Heather Pavilion would be restored and preserved. Well, here we are 17 years later. So in the meantime, a certain amount of demolition has occurred based on that rezoning, but At this point in time, the needs of the campus have changed again. And so there is a new rezoning process underway, which is opening up the old rezoning, which is looking at that and what the needs are on the site, and also includes BC Cancer Centre and et cetera. And it's a complex, huge process with many of its own functional needs to resolve. However, in the middle of this is the designated Heather Pavilion. And so that is where the Heather Heritage Society is still involved in meetings about adaptive reuse and promoting the restoration of this building. So that is underway right now. And so it's a public process. It's just kind of got going. And we have been meeting with them as members of the society with both the consultants who are doing the rezoning work and the hospital to understand that we are not going away, because this has been going on for 25 years. Thank you very much that the Heather Heritage Society has been lobbying for this reuse of the building. So no one's going away. And because of the designation, we're able to talk to the consultants about their obligations to this designation and what that means, and how to achieve a respectful upgrade of the building, and to actually find ways to incorporate it in an appropriate way within what is going to be a pretty dense redevelopment of the site. Now, thinking back to 5.5 acres, it sounds like a lot until you actually try and cram a whole bunch of buildings onto it, right? And make that make sense from a functional point of view, and still have open space and still make transportation work, and et cetera. So it is a challenge. So again, the Society has been working with the project team and has prepared a draft statement of significance as an initial step in understanding what is valuable about this site. When the building was built designated in 2002, that was just prior to new tools becoming available that we use in heritage, including the development of what's called a statement of significance, which is a statement of heritage value and an analysis of what is important about the site. So there was a designation, but there was no statement of significance. So we worked as the Heather Heritage Society to provide that to the project team, so they didn't have to go out and figure it out. And what we have stated, and this is in a draft stage and still being reviewed, but what we stated is that it is important and valued by the community as the heart of Vancouver General Hospital. It was the first building in the beginning, the building that was the generator of the growth of the campus, and is one of the city's most significant early institutional buildings. It survives from 1906. The city was founded in 1886. 20 years old, and this was one of its very important early institutional buildings that survived. It's important for its association with the development of medical technology and with the nursing profession. It's also additionally significant as one of the most important surviving examples in Western Canada of the Romanesque revival style, which was very popular and important at the time. Character-defining elements, I'll just run through very quickly, but its location, its setback, which we thought was incredibly important to get down on paper, that we didn't want anything built in front of it ever again. And that was why we wanted to say that this was part of what defined its character. Its continuous institutional use, its institutional form, scale, and massing, so we wanted to describe the actual physicality of the building. And when you look around, there's actually, again, a surprising amount left. There's a lot of this building still there. I mean, I can't explain some of these later additions, but there they are. They'll come off pretty easily. But so much of the original granite structure of the building is still there. We see it as we move around the building. We see a lot of it still there. And ultimately, you can see how it could be restored. It's got its original wooden roof and its slate shingles and some of its windows, and it's remarkable what has survived of this building. And so this gives us an opportunity as we move forward to carefully remove those additions and restore what's left. What's really important, again, is this landscaped, gracious forecourt, which has been lost, which we think is important to think about how we're going to recapture that open space. Also in its character-defining elements are it's an incredible construction of monolithic masonry construction that we just don't see buildings built like this anymore. Solid granite. Just remarkable. And as far as it being important for its architectural style, it is an astonishing building when you take a step back and look at this within the history of what was being built institutionally in Western Canada, and how ambitious it was, how important it was, how significant it was. George W. Grant in 1903 completed the Carnegie Center, and you can see the scale of that building in comparison. You could fit about 6 of these in the Heather Pavilion. And you can see the ideas that Grant had in terms of his approach to this great civic architecture and civic institution of the Carnegie Library, and how that kind of translated into the monolithic construction when he teamed up with his partner Alexander Grant. He was really busy after this commission, and won the competition for the new city hospital in 1904. I think you get the sense of the scale of this building when you look at this comparison. Also, there's a few other things that are really fun that we're hoping are going to come out of that restoration. Apparently, that name, all the name carved in stone at the front entry is still there, and people have seen it behind ceilings and things, so kind of when that can be daylighted. And to put a little icing on the cake, the 2 original wrought iron entry lamps are still available. They're a block away, but they can be restored too. So we're hoping that this will provide some significant ability to put this building back authentically. I'll just leave you with a few thoughts about it. I've been crawling around this site now for many years, and to me it is no surprise that it survived. How would you tear this thing down? You would have had to tried really hard, and we tore down some really significant buildings in this city, so it did happen, but somehow this one got encapsulated. And this, what I think would be really significant in terms of this as a great step forward for the city, is to recognize and recapture this character of this building. It's pretty sad the way it looks right now, but you can see the importance of this building to our city's development, the graciousness of the way that the building was designed, how progressive it was, how much of a symbol of the city's growth and maturity very early in its history, and we can get it back. Thank you. So one of the things that is really important about the rezoning process is it's kicked off this discussion again. And it's kicked off the opportunity for people to be involved in discussions about the campus and to begin to understand how this building will be reused within the context of the new rezoning for the site. One of the things that's really important is that the Heather Heritage Society worked very hard early on in developing different uses for this building. It's clearly not going to be a medical facility. The floor heights don't work for medical care. There's many things that it would be better adapted to, but the need for office space, public space, community space, coffee shops, restaurants on the campus, a public face to the hospital, somewhere to welcome people. These are all things that have been talked about in the past and remain relevant into the future. So I'd be happy to answer questions or to discuss some of those topics with you.